welcome to the BizLaunch webinar on strategic planning. We're looking forward to having us all with you here today on this rainy afternoon. This is the first of a series of webinars that we're going to be hosting every Tuesday in conjunction with Capital One. And we're really excited to be offering this series to you all this morning. Before we jump in, I want to talk a little bit about the logistics for today. If I can scroll ahead, I will do so. A little bit of information about today's webinar. Right now, everyone is placed in listen-only mode until the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you come up with a question as we're going along, definitely feel free to type it into the chat window. We'll get back to everybody with their questions during the Q&A at the end. We will be moderated at the end of the webinar by Arlington's very own Lourdes Morales. She will be taking your questions. And just in case you're not able to stay for the entire webinar, we will be recording today's presentation and we'll have it on our Arlington Economic Development website by the end of this week. Now, if we have spurred you on with additional questions regarding strategic planning, feel free. We do not go away after this. We work very closely with our business counselors through SCORE, and you can always follow up by calling us directly or making an appointment to follow up, because we know how it goes with doing some strategic planning. Now, I referred to we, and as you can see, the we in the room is myself. My name is Tara Palacios, and I am the Director of the Small Business Program here in Arlington County. It is my absolute pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon. And in joining me here in our Ballston room is Joe Clark, who is the SCORE Counselor Extraordinaire here in Arlington. Welcome, Joe.
Well, thank you very much, Tara. I'm looking forward to it.
And Joe Clark has vast experience, numerous experience in doing business counseling, but one of the main things that I can tell you about Joe is that he really gets how to create a strategic plan and understanding what all the key elements are, how to take the fear out of it, jump in, and make something executionable. So I think you'll really walk away this afternoon with some very useful information. With that said, we're going to really try to highlight our hour by going online and chatting with you all. If you have any thoughts or questions or you want to communicate with us that way, I will be live tweeting some of Joe's salient facts that he will be talking about. So if you follow us on our hashtag BizLaunchChat, we'll love to chat with you as we go along. Now, this is the big question. When you think business planning or strategic planning, do you want to take a bite out of your computer in frustration? Where to start, what to do, what's most important, trying to look ahead 5 years out, 10 years out. You know, it can be very intimidating. Any type of strategic planning, whether it's one aspect of your business or your entire business, it can really get you, right? Or you may just want to take the computer and just throw it somewhere. But we know technology and we know paying for hardware can be quite expensive. So we want you to leave out this afternoon feeling more like this: content, happy, ready to execute your business, and feeling really good about what you need to do with your business. So we hope that today's program you will get a sign of contentment after the hour. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the illustrious presentation over to my friend Joe Clark of SCORE, who's going to talk to us more about strategic business planning.
Thank you, Tara. That gives me a tough road to follow with the pictures that you take, but let's see what we can do about this. A lot of people, I see many customers coming in talking to SCORE and having a tremendous amount of concern about where are they going, what are they doing with their business, what direction should they be trying to move in, and basically just trying to figure out what are the type of things they should consider and how do they make decisions on what direction the business should be moving in. Basically, we call that the strategic planning process of trying to decide what it is you want your business to be. And quite frankly, many people get caught up in this. There's the paralysis of analysis where they get going and because they can't think through all of the difficult, all of the various possibilities, they end up doing nothing. Or they get caught up in the crunch of doing day-to-day business, and because of that, never start thinking about where they want things to go. As a result of that, they end up where they just follow along with what's happening on a day-by-day basis, and they end up missing some important directions, or just never really able to move their business to that next level. So what we're trying to do is come up with some information that might help people through that situation and understand how can they start planning for what they want their business to be, and how are they going to take steps, take actions that move them along that path versus going down some dead end. Mm-hmm. So what we thought we would be covering on this, the first thing is just let's get some definitions of what do we mean by a strategic plan. How does that all fit together? What are the things that you really need to be looking at when we are talking about strategic planning? The other thing that we find people getting caught up on is they have no idea how do they find out which way they should be going or what opportunities are available to them. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the steps that you might be following, some ideas that you might pursue to help you find out what is the best strategic direction and get the data that you need in order to make these difficult decisions. Next thing I'd like to do is just pull this all together, and it's a graphic we use when we help people in writing their business plan that's extremely valuable in this whole process. It gives you the full context of the business planning process, and by looking at that, you can use it as a tool to help you in identifying how you're going to go about doing your strategic planning. And more importantly, how do you take that strategic plan and translate that into the tactical and operational actions that move you toward that strategic goal? Then I'd like to finish up with some best practices, things that we've seen that people follow along and get some good results because of all that. So that's for today's agenda. Let's go ahead and move right into that. All right, so the key elements. So when people are talking about a strategic plan, it may mean different things to different people. Many people get concerned about the idea of having a polished document that they can hand over to somebody, and I think that's really a misdirected emphasis. What you really want to be thinking about is what is the purpose of the strategic plan, and then more the content and the thought process rather than the format that it takes. So in the basic conditions of this, the strategic plan is really your attempt to establish the vision for what you want your business to be. This is you looking forward sometime out in the future and trying to decide, what do I want this organization that I've created or that I'm running, how do I want it to look, and how do I want it to be operating at some point in the future? Obviously, to do that and to be very clear and concise in that definition, it really means that you have to have identified what it is you want this business to be. You have to have objectives in mind, and that's not always as simple as it sounds. Now, part of the problem that I see most people having is that they haven't really defined what they want their business to be when it grows up. And there are many different choices. Most people say, I just want to be larger in sales, or have more people, or have more customers. And they use some general terms like that and expect that to be giving sufficient detail. Unfortunately, that doesn't give you enough information to be able to come up with any actionable or executable plans. And also, it may be that people don't like things like, for example, I have customers that want to have a lifestyle business. What they really want is they want to have gainful employment and be able to do the work, the type of craft or the type of activities that they enjoy and have expertise in, and they just want to be sufficient to have the income sufficient, and they're not looking to grow an organization. That's certainly a very legitimate type of goal and objective. But until you clarify what your objective is and what you want your business to end up being, you are not able to really decide whether an investment or an activity is going to move you toward that goal, or is it just something that you're trying to see what happens. So the second step of the strategic plan forces you to take a cold, hard look at what you want this business to be and what those objectives are. I think I lost my focus here. I'm not advancing the slide, Tara.
Come on in.
All right, 1 minute while we work on our technical issue. Thanks, Rick. There we go. Okay, I think we got it. There we go.
There
All
it
right,
is.
thank you.
You're trying to trip us up in the rain, but it's not going to happen.
Typical thing
No.
like moving the cursor. All right. The next aspect, a key element of the strategic plan is the time frame that it covers, and this is critical. People can err at both sides on this equation. They can go for they're not going out far enough, and they never then are able to get ahead of the events and be able to implement things and have them happen and be invoked. So if your strategic time frame is too short, you're not going to have time to develop the actions and put resources in place to be able to catch up to that vision. If it's too far out, then it's just so far in the future nobody really is going to pay any attention to it. So you've got to strike the medium balance. For most companies, I would say typically it's going to be 3 to 5 years is a decent time frame to be acting on. It gives you time to take some action, see some results, and measure progress toward that, but it's not so far out that things are irrelevant. The biggest thing that you need to get out of this is you've got to come out with some very concrete, specific information that will allow you then to devise the tactical and operational plans that will let you move toward that strategic direction. So it's got to be something real. You've got to have set a goal of a certain, let's say, a volume of sales, or maybe the number of customers, or it may be the number of contract vehicles you're on if you're a government contractor. You're going to be laying out some very specific goals of how you want to move, and then from that, you can translate that into what are the tactical steps that you have to take in order to get there. And finally, the operational activities that you have to do day in and day out to support that. It helps you then identify whether or not you can prioritize what actions you're going to take based on those that are going to move you in that strategic direction. So the key elements again is your vision. It's how do you lay this all out? It's at the time frame that's executable, and then it sets the groundwork for you going forward and making the actual action items that you're going to invoke. Finally, the most important part is you got to find how you're going to communicate this to the people that really need to know this. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that are going to have to buy in on this and be committed to this and be executing parts of this? So you have to identify those stakeholders and find the most effective way of communicating to them. That may be by briefings, it may be by PowerPoint presentations, or it may be an actual document. Your audience and the way they want to be communicated to will dictate the format that you use. So the last thing you worry about is the format. The main thing you worry about is what is the content of that strategic plan. All right, with that in mind, let me move into the next area. And the next thing is, how do I identify the type of things that I should be considering in my goal? And for that, I asked a number of questions. The first one, the one that most people seem to want to overlook, is what am I doing on my current services that I'm offering that are really successful? If you can identify those customers who brag about you and are excited, that means that your value proposition, the problem you're solving for those customers really worked well. They got excited. That means you came up with something that really worked well in solving their problem. So part of your strategic direction may be, how do I find more of them? But until you identify who those customers are and what commonalities they have, you may be missing some very important aspects. Now, the flip side of that is if your current business portfolio, if you only have a few customers that are bragging about some of the activities that you're doing and everybody else is giving you bad reviews, then the market is telling you that you better change what strategic direction you're going in. But the point here is, look at who's involved, who you're already doing work from, listen to those customers, and find out the ones that are really, you've done well, because that means you've resonated with them, and now you want to see how many places can you replicate that success and build on more and more of those. So the first step is look at what you're doing currently. Next part is figuring out what's happening within your industry. So you want to get external here. You want to be looking at what else is going on that you should be aware of. Are you in an area where you are providing services that are being replicated by AutoCAD drawings, for example? Or are you in an area where the industry is changing and they're moving to a different business model that now says we're only going to do firm fixed price type of engagements and we're not going to support hourly billing? Well, there are a number of industry trends. You have to be aware of those because the chances are you're not going to be able to buck those trends. You need to understand which way they take you. So don't take a strategic direction that is fighting against what the industry in general is doing, is you're making your job that much harder. The other part of it is look at your customers. What's happening to them? For example, if your customer base is primarily baby boomers and they are looking for different services, maybe if you're in construction, this is a time where you want to modify where you're going so you can have more giving people the ability to live in their homes and continue with doing accessibility issues for bathroom remodeling, for example. So you look at what's happening to that industry, to the market, and seeing where they're trending, what's going on with them, and using that as an input for how you decide what strategic direction you should be going in. Next part of it is look at to your other competitors. See what they're doing. Are they changing things? Are they bundling different type of warranties in their services? Are they now packaging things differently? Do they consider your market to be a commodity and they're competing on price only? Or do they see it as a niche market where you're now focusing on the type of features you offer, and then the real move is to introduce new capabilities, new features, and maintain that niche advantage? So you have to look and see what they're doing. Doesn't mean you follow what they're doing, but it does mean you need to be aware of that so that you try to get ahead of that trend. And all of these trends, what you're trying to do is be aware of the trends and see if we can get a step in front of that and take advantage of it. Then don't forget you need to look internally. Are there things going on within your operation, your way of doing business, that could be improved, either to give yourself more effectiveness and new features, new capabilities, new services, or efficiency, ways of driving down your cost, your overhead, your fixed overhead cost, get them low enough so that you can give yourself more of a margin to be able to do more work and expand into other areas. So you're looking at ways that you can improve what's going on in your internal operation. Now that becomes a strategic planning initiative when you're starting to look at new capabilities, new features that you might be able to procure and invoke and learn that would then give you that competitive advantage. So it may be that you're looking for a new piece of equipment, or maybe there's a new software product out there that might be able to help your internal operations. A strategic direction may be to learn that, bring that on board, and then increase your margin because you're taking advantage of that. So those are examples of different opportunities that you might be looking at and trying to consider as you're moving forward. I mentioned earlier that we have a process map that we use that helps identify for a business plan. I'd like to take just about 2 or 3 minutes to walk through that, because the linkage of all this and the structure of this is critical when you're doing your strategic planning. So let me walk through that next. I started all off with where you have a product or service that you're offering. So you define that you are providing to the market, and you believe the market will pay you money for this. You identify the market to come out and clarify who wants it, how big that market is, what are the characteristics of that market, and how do I identify them and reach them. From that, I look at who else is out there doing this, so I get my competition in mind and understand where their strengths are and what are their weaknesses. Given that, I can then define a marketing plan, which will say, how will I go about making the market aware of what I have available? The idea of a build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door is a myth, is a fallacy. You've got to have a very proactive marketing plan that says, how am I going to tell people about what it is I do? From that, I should be able to project how many sales I'm going to be making. And if I define my sales and my projected sales and when they're going to hit, I can lay out all the operational aspects of my business, my operations, hours of operations, staff, what organization I need to invoke all this, what resources are going to be required, and also what my finances are going to be. Obviously, when you do that, the first time through, things may not fit right, and you have to keep going back. But what you want to do is repeat that loop to the point where you get something that you're sure can be done. Now, I emphasize this because we have different terminology and different analytical tools that fit different parts of this process cycle. So, for example, the value proposition, excuse me, is where you're really defining to the market. You're saying, what problem am I solving? Who wants that solved? And then what makes me special, makes me different from the rest of the market. The target market is the quantification of who I'm going for, which is going to be not only the size, but also the attributes that tells me how I should be approaching those people. When I look at my competition, I'm really focused on a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. All the questions that I had on the prior slide are really driven to answer the SWOT analysis. What are the strengths and weaknesses of my competition? The opportunities and threats are the external factors that are going on and driving what may be happening to the market. I will define marketing campaigns from that and use those marketing campaigns with the goal of achieving my sales projections. On the left-hand side of this slide are all of the mechanics, financial mechanics, your things like your profit loss, your cash flow, your balance sheet. All those aspects that are required to then define what the finances are going to be required to make this all happen. The reason I'm emphasizing this slide is when you're doing strategic planning, we do a couple of things that I think get us in trouble. One is that we think of one aspect of, say, I want to increase my sales. And they don't follow through all the way through on all the downstream impacts of that change in market. So if I redefine my product, that's also going to redefine who's a most likely target market. it will also impact what the competitors are doing and how they react to this. All of these things have a ripple effect. So as I change something, I've got to follow that process through. So a strategic goal of introducing a new product may be valuable, but then I have to do the analysis on what impact is that going to have on my operation all the way downstream. So the point I would make here is we can use this structure to look at things. So I may say I'm going to identify a different market or serve a different market. Well, from that I can identify what are the attributes of that market. How do I have to reach them? I can understand who the competitors are that are working in there. And I can then take my strategic direction and start to go ahead and define some tactical and operational plans that will help me achieve that strategic direction. Now, the two aspects that are critical in this that I just like to emphasize is, one, whatever you come up with on your strategic direction has to be realistic and achievable. We can have these grandiose plans. I want to be a $100 million company in 2 years. If that's not achievable with my resources and my market share, then it's not very valuable. So I can use this to help quantify this and identify what are the actions that are needed to achieve that goal. But then I also need to be able to measure as I'm going along. And I use my process flow to identify either direct metrics or downstream metrics that'll help me indicate whether or not I'm going to be getting there. So, for example, if my goal is to get a 10% market share, and then what I want to do is I'll identify what marketing campaigns are going to be needed, and I can identify a specific purpose to those marketing campaigns and see how I measure my increase number of customers. I can go in and actually tailor what my marketing message is based on that larger market definition and the value proposition that I'm offering. My point is that all of this has to be tied together and has to be internally consistent. So you've got to think it through and see what are the downstream impacts on what I'm doing. That may alter what I pick for a strategic direction. All right, so what I wanted to do next, I thought, would be just get into some of the best practices that I've seen.
Yes.
And then I think maybe we can open things up for questions.
Stuff that we've seen that we just know that it's going to be a winning strategic plan.
Okay. Well, first one. I have a platitude alert.
What is that, Joe?
People are great especially when you're talking in a strategic plan level, they want to revert to generalities. They're godmotherhood and apple pie things. If they're saying we're going to improve our customer service, customer-centric approach to serving customers, or we're going to improve the highest quality of service, or any generalities that aren't very meaningful all by themselves. Nobody's going to argue that these are things that you should be doing, but what value does that statement have? Platitudes get in the way. Platitudes muddy up your thinking, and they make us feel like we've answered the question when in fact we really have not. So I always look at anybody's work and I review it and say how many platitudes you got in there, and then make you redo it from there. That's one. Smart metrics is a term I've got another slide I'll show in just a minute here that'll define this, but basically what we're looking for are metrics that can be reviewed, and objectively you can decide whether or not that metric has been achieved or how close are you on that. There's some aspects of a metric. You've got to pick metrics that are going to be useful to you and help move you in the right direction. And we'll talk in another slide about the definitions of this, but a SMART metric is one that you can use to actually measure what you're doing. Everybody will agree with that. Here's what the definition of this is, and it will be something that people can buy into. So I'll show you how you can create those in just a minute. you got to find out who has to execute on this plan. Who's going to be the one responsible? Now, whether it's your director of sales or whether it's your operations chief or doesn't matter who it is within the organization, there's going to be somebody who has a major impact on this. You've got to get buy-in from them. That buy-in may be where you have them involved in helping to set this strategic direction. It may be in the form of compensation packages that their compensation is directly detailed or dictated by how well you achieve your strategic goals. You want everybody buying in and everybody working toward the right direction, the agreed direction. The other thing you want to avoid is the rosy glass syndrome, where you come up with all these wonderful plans on what you're going to do, but they're not achievable. You need to get somebody who is not emotionally involved in your solution.
Like a business counselor.
Like a business score counselor, to be able to sit down and say, does this make sense? Is this communicated effectively? They're not going to say this is the right or wrong strategic goal, but they will be able to say, is that communicated properly and does it make sense within the environment that you're dealing with?
And that doesn't necessarily, I don't mean to interrupt Joe, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like you.
Right.
And sometimes I get the sense that there's like a third-party person that's like reviewing your plan, and you want to have an open mind, I think, as part of this process, talking best practices.
And what happens is that we get too, we don't see the forest for the trees. We get focused on the immediate details, and as a result of that, we don't see the overall picture. Having somebody come out from the outside who has perhaps knowledge of the industry, but not involved in the day-to-day aspects of creating this plan, having somebody else look at this, they can provide a reality check, and that can help you avoid some of those issues when we get too close to things we just don't see. That's what the type of check I'm talking about. But you're right, it's not something that they don't like you or not. It's just saying, does this plan hold together? The other thing is, as you're going through this whole strategic planning process, it's not a once done and put on the shelf and forget about it. This is something where you are working on, and this is how you're going to manage the business. So you need a commitment to do periodic and event-driven reviews.
How often?
Depends on the nature of the business, how volatile things are, and how much change are you trying to invoke. It may be that a quarterly review is sufficient. It may be that you need it monthly. So it depends on the volatility of it. But I put in here two different types of reviews. One is going to be periodic, and that's where you have to force yourself on a repeating basis to do a check on your progress. And are we achieving our strategic goals or not? Are we moving in the right direction? If you don't force yourself to do it periodically, you will find reasons not to do that review. And then pretty soon it'll be a year or two down the road, and the plan is out of date and no longer very useful to anybody. So it has to be done on a periodic basis. But then you also need to do event-driven ones where you achieve a particular milestone, or you acquire another company, or you have some major contract that gets awarded that has a move in the trend of your operation. Those are events that require you to sit down, review where you are, and validate, is that still the direction you want to go in?
And I guess the best practice, the sense that I'm getting, is that this isn't a one and done.
Right.
This is in the life cycle of your business, you need to constantly be in a strategic planning mode.
Right. You can make an analogy to you're taking a trip. You're going to drive across country, and what's happening is you've laid out a roadmap on where you're going, and you said it's going to take me 10 days. But as you're going along and you find that bridges are out, or a rainstorm like today, or adverse weather comes in, it changes what's happened. You have to periodically sit back and say, am I still moving in the right direction? The strategic plan is your goal to get to the other side of the country.
From A to B.
Right, and the tactical is going to say what type of car, what roads you're going to be taking. Operational is what speed you're going to drive. But as you're going along, you have to be monitoring that. The frequency of that monitoring is dependent upon the situation. But the reality is that you have to be checking your progress toward this goal and keep on focused on that goal. Otherwise, you'll end up in Mexico or Canada.
Not where you want to go.
Right. So that analogy holds true for many businesses. They decide where they're trying to go, and then they let events move them in different areas. The periodic review of your metrics makes you say and reevaluate, is my strategic goal still valuable, or have I decided because of the market that I'm now going to go in a different direction?
Now, is it okay as you're doing these check-ins if you have to go to another country? Like, you say you're headed to California.
That segued into my next
line. Reading your mind.
As part of the process of this is, as I'm looking at this and seeing what progress I'm making, I may decide I'm going to take the north route versus the south route. And I need to have, as part of my process, a decision that I will do a mid-course correction rather than getting all the way across to the west side of the country and finding out, I meant to go to Seattle, but now I'm down in San Diego.
That's right.
So make your mid-course corrections as you're going along so that you can keep yourself moving as close to the goal as possible.
Okay.
The final part, though, that really makes it important is that the market is going to tell you whether or not your business plan, your strategic direction is valid.
That's right.
And the market may not share your enthusiasm for your products and services, or it may say, hey, you underestimated how valuable they are. You've got to listen to the market and let the market redirect you and bring you toward whatever goal it is. I mean, if it's time to change that goal, the market will tell you.
And usually that's when you see a company that gets started with a bang, and then a year or two later, they're no longer around because they're not willing to. Like, I think somebody that does it really well is like Georgetown Cupcakes. You know, most people said, oh, this is just a one-shot phenomenon. This business isn't going to last very long term. But they've been around for almost 10 years.
Yeah. And it's a matter of constantly reinventing yourself and listening to what the market is saying and deciding where you need to shift your resources. So, But you got to be willing to listen to the market, and your strategic plan should include reviews that keep on testing out what the market is telling you.
Okay. And don't put the blinders on.
Right.
Put the rose-colored glasses.
All right. So what all that means? I'm sorry. Let me.
I
forgot to mention.
I'm curious about the SMART metric.
SMART. This is not just something that I've come up with or is done separately for this. This is a standard terminology in performance management, and the SMART metric have these characteristics. You're picking some goal, some number. First thing, it's got to be very specific, so that you avoid misinterpretation. The goal of getting better customers would not be very specific. And there could be open to interpretation on whether or not that was what you wanted. A specific goal, a specific metric is very clear, very focused, and everybody agrees what that means. It's also measurable, and that you can compare it to data and look at and make you can measure your progress toward a particular goal, because this metric is something that can be used, and you can compare time period performance on things.
Okay.
The other aspect is attainable. So under the expected conditions of where you're going and what you see being covered in the business plan, in the strategic plan, is it realistic? Is that something that, given the right resources, can you achieve that goal? Don't set up a goal to be the $100 million company and where you don't have enough money to even pay the bills or keep the house going. Realistic is twofold aspect. One is that it's something that's cost effective, something reasonable to do and to measure, or Secondly, is does it fit within the culture of the company? Is this something that is it an unrealistic goal would be that we're going to change the personality stamp of the company completely in a 2-month period? You're going to have something that can be done, and the culture of the company is it's something that moves very slowly. It doesn't change rapidly. So that's why you want to consider the culture as part of that. And then obviously, don't pick a goal that can be achieved, but not within the time frame of the strategic plan. So those are what we mean by attributes of SMART metrics. Pick things that fit these categories. Do these litmus tests on them to see, does it make sense, and have I got a metric that I'm chasing that makes sense, that fits these needs. Now, the other thing I caution in reality is you never pick one metric and measure only to that. Oh. You should pick counterbalancing metrics. For example, in help desk, you may have a metric that says that I'm going to hit my response time. I'm going to reduce my response time to 30 seconds.
Okay. And
what happens is people then pick up and say, I'm here to help you, please go on hold. And then you're on hold for 2 days, right? My point being that you have to have something that balances. So it's response time, but also call resolution in that case.
Okay.
So whatever environment it is you're dealing with, you want to have a balance of metrics so that people can't abuse them. In most organizations, when you set metrics, people will find ways to abuse them for personal advancement, especially if part of their compensation is key to achieving those metrics. So just be aware, that's one of the gotchas that could hit you.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we put all that together. There's my contact. I think there it is. That's
we've got all kinds of happy people.
All of this is very achievable stuff, is doable stuff, but it's a matter of thinking it through and being reasonable as you do it.
Yeah, because I guess in life, if it's balanced and you're using metrics and you're making sure, because I think a lot of the times when I'm meeting with people, they're really happy about what it is that they're doing,
right,
and not open-minded because they've done research, but maybe they haven't gone to a third-party person yet to kind of get their view on things.
I think the most difficult thing people have with strategic planning is coming up with some concrete, specific articulation of their future state. They haven't picked out the goal. They haven't figured out what it is that this is going to look like when you are successful. And until you are able to really describe what it is you want to achieve, it's very difficult to decide, how do I get there?
Now, could you give an example of maybe one of the best strategic plans that you've encountered that was executionable?
Well, I mean...
or what are the elements that they did that really...
Yeah, one of the ones was in government contracting, where they decided what they wanted to do was gain more of a share. And they had a goal in mind for sales, and they wanted to increase that. And they had strategic directions on how they would handle that. What he did was they basically decided that they would measure the difference between whether they were doing contract work, software work, either maintaining existing systems or creating new systems.
Oh,
okay.
That's a good
question. And the split between those two was the metric that they wanted to follow. Because they had a higher profit margin in new systems and a lower profit margin, but more steady work with maintaining current systems.
Oh.
So they balanced that to try to come up. They wanted to be able to do both. And the reason they wanted to do both was they found that in bad times, people don't develop new systems. They maintain, but they have to maintain the old.
But they have.
So they were able to set up strategic goals that would say, depending upon how we see the economy going, they would shift resources from either going into maintenance or developing new systems. And they would basically chase government contracts that were either for maintaining existing systems or developing new systems based on what they saw coming down the road.
And they kind of split the middle depending on, so they had to be nimble on their feet.
They needed to have the capability to do both. But where you put your emphasis and which types of government contracts to chase after was driven by their outlook on their strategic vision of what the economy would look like in 5 years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Joe.
And they by the way, they grew from about 10 people to 150 people in the process of
Oh my gosh. And you think it was because of
I know it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, everybody.
He was my boss.
So you know.
I know how he went through the planning process.
Wow.
That was exactly
really
what he did.
Cool.
And he articulated that to everybody, saying, this is what we're going to try, and here's why we're going to chase these contracts versus the others.
So he really ended up looking like our example on the screen right there.
I'm not going to be quoted as saying he looked like that.
That came from me. All right. Well, Lourdes, I am going to ask you, since you are our monitor extraordinaire, can you let us know if there are any questions that we have on the line?
Thanks, Tara. Actually, we have a few questions here, and please feel free, anyone, to send us more questions. The first one is, how do you get involved in an industry that you have not developed any connections?
Oh, that's a good question.
All right. Well, if the strategic direction is to break into a new industry, first thing, you've got to approach it from the customer's point of view. Why is a customer going to pay you money to do something in an industry that you have no experience?
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way of getting into that, either through hiring staff that does have that experience, or potentially acquiring a smaller business. There may be ways that you can get that experience base to move into a new direction, but without that experience, you're basically asking the customer to say, oh, trust me, I'll do something for you. And that doesn't necessarily work too well.
That makes sense, because it makes it harder.
Well, you've got to position it from the customer's point of view. Why is the customer going to give you money to learn how to do something in a particular industry?
On their dime, right? Yeah.
So customers don't do that.
Yeah.
So, but they would do it if you can show relevant experience, something close to that, and make a legitimate argument that I'm able to do this because I've done this in other areas, and I have at least some entree into the industry, such as a new hire or somebody else who has that information.
Or somebody you could bring on as part of the...
Right. Or teaming with another company.
All right. Next question, Lauren.
Yeah. What are the common mistakes failed businesses go through?
The biggest one I see is not really have any strategic direction of what they're trying to do. They don't have a clear vision of what they want their business to do, and as a result, they chase whatever comes in. That's the biggest thing. And then what happens is if you keep chasing things, you never develop the expertise that you need to differentiate yourself. So I'd say getting a strategic direction, deciding what it is that you want this company to do, and then really getting down into the details of what does that look like, what does it mean, then gives you the ability to come up with actionable items. So I'd say lack of vision is the biggest thing that I see. The second thing I'd say is unrealistic vision, where you haven't thought about what resources you can get or what resources you currently have, and you're going to say, I'm going to just let it grow and make things better as I go along, and that doesn't happen.
It's almost like having a great idea and believing in the idea, but not mapping it out.
Right.
Just kind of like taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, and I find that happens frequently. People have a technological idea or a product idea that is really great, but they haven't thought through what else is going to be required to provide that service, to market that service, and to administrate it, that they fail on. So the lack of clarity in what all is going to be required, what are you need to support that business, get people in trouble.
It's usually, I look at it almost too as a chess game, like as you're starting the planning process. And if I move my king here, or if I move my pawns here, does that leave me vulnerable? But like trying to think that 3 to 5 years out.
And the strategic goal is that you have to be thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead.
Yeah.
And not that you're necessarily going to be able to predict those, but what you're really trying to do is have something in your pocket that if it happens, you're ready to use.
It's more of a calculated risk.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not a leap of faith. Right. How are we doing with more questions, Laura?
Yes, there are more. So the next one, how much time should I spend on building my strategic plan? And when do I know I have enough information to make a decision?
All right. Well, there is no, I'll give you my consultant answer. It depends. So there's not one clear answer on that. It really does depend on the scope and scale of what you're trying to do. The issue of how big it should be or how involved it should be depends on what type of, can you take that strategic plan and use it to create tactical plans that'll move you in the right direction. If you've got sufficient detail and sufficient information on that, then that you've gone far enough and you probably don't need to go any further. The issue of how do I know that I've got enough information to be able to make my decision, you're really asking how do I know when I know enough, or when what are the unknown unknowns, to quote the Secretary of Defense. Those are difficult ones, and you're never going to get a clear answer on that. I certainly would not be spending all my time doing my strategic plan, because I've got to run the business. I've got to do a lot of work on that. I would say that, just rough number of things, I would want to have probably 5 or 10% of my effort into my strategic planning. So I know that I'm either creating it or reviewing it, so that I keep myself on target. But as far as knowing how big or what other things are out there, it depends on the industry and how volatile that is. If you're in a very well-defined, mature industry, your strategic planning may be relatively simple to do, and there's not going to be a whole lot of unknowns. If you're in an emerging market that's just still being found out, you may have to be revising that and doing a lot of research constantly just to keep ahead of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. The next one is regarding resources available. Are there resources available to help me to uncover the data that I need?
Oh, absolutely. That's the biggest advantage of what we've got right now is that there's a wealth of information, no further away than Google or whatever, whichever search engine you want to choose. That certainly is easy enough. Getting the data and enough government information that helps quantify things. The biggest challenge is deciding what it is that you're trying to measure and what research do you need to identify that. So
yeah, I guess in your example of best practices with a company that had a decision between going through two different modes, how were they able to make that, kind of, okay, we're going to depend on the market? Like, how did they?
Yeah, they were looking, quite frankly, their major thing they needed to find out was what they think the economic outlook was. And of course, there's a lot of information about that. Is there a lot of certainty on that? No. But they had general information.
Did they question their customers?
In that part of it, no, because what they were trying to decide is whether or not they would see the need for more maintenance or new development and what type of skills they would need.
Gotcha.
They decided that they couldn't get a very clear answer and they had to keep a foot in each camp.
Okay.
So that's the reason that they maintained things where there were times where we were losing money on maintenance contracts because the prices had just gotten so steep, and people would say, why are you doing that? And the reason was because when the downturn came, If you didn't have a track record of doing maintenance work, you weren't going to win any of those contracts. So they accepted sub-optimization in order to allow for that flexibility. But the answer on how to get this information and pull this together, you know, from the library situation, the phenomenal resources that are available.
All of it's free, everybody.
All of it free.
4-letter word, good word.
And then there are people that can help you in the process of creating this and putting this together, and whether it's a score council to review that. Again, the price is not significant. The time that you're putting into it and effort and thought process is what your investment really is.
Lourdes, any other questions?
Yes. One more, and it's how often do you recommend to review your business plan?
Well, the business plan, and as opposed to the strategic plan, again, depends on the volatility of your business and what's going on. Certainly on my business plan, I'm going to be at least monthly going to be reviewing my performance and mapping that against my forecast. So I'm going to do that analysis at least monthly to make sure that I'm tracking well on that. As far as the strategic plan, I tend to see those are things that are probably taking longer to develop. So as far as events, so I would think more along the lines of a quarterly review makes most sense for most companies. And again, I have the caveat is that if you're in a very volatile industry or market, then you're going to need to be looking at things more frequently than that.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
All right. I guess that's our last question for the lunch hour, and I would like to officially thank Joe for taking the time to help us talk about strategic business planning. Just so everybody is aware, Joe, would you be able to forward us? Let's see. We do have another webinar coming up next Tuesday, and it's all about the funding. So if you go to our website and take a look, you'll see that we'll have our friends from Capital One joining us to talk about not only strategic business planning, but strategic funding methods. And if you visit us on our website at Arlington Economic Development, you can register for that. And thank you all so much for joining us. Oh, yes, and we'll also be able to, Joe has just let me know that there will be a PDF available of the presentation, so you will have it for prosperity. And we will be posting up the webinar at the end of the week on our webinar website on arlingtoneconomicdevelopment.com. With that, we must bid adieu, and I thank our partners in crime, Greater Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and BizLaunch, and as well as Capital One Bank. And we hope that you'll be able to join us again next week. Have a great week, everyone.